Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Phillips. I used to teach here for years and years. And I've lived and worked in Central America on and off since about 1974. So, I'm more than 20 years old. And so I've been there enough, and recently I was there twice this past year in Central America. My wife does a lot of work there as well. Some of you know about that. I also do expert witnessing, provide expert witnessing in asylum cases for Honduran asylum seekers in the United States in immigration courts. And so I'm going to just spend a few minutes tonight. It took a lot of time. Trying to give you just a little bit of background. A lot of you probably know some of this anyway, but it's worth kind of repeating some of it. I'm going to talk about immigration in the background to this. We have right now, in the month of February, the official figures that I've seen given by our government and by agencies for the arrivals at the border, at the southern border, from just countries like Honduras, for example, 60,000 people in the month of February. Month of March, it was over 100,000 arriving at the border. And then on top of that, there's the caravans coming up from Mexico. Some of them will not get to the U.S. border because the Mexican government has been detaining them now and turning them back a little bit, a lot. And that's been going on for a long time as well. But then, from a country like Honduras, I'm just taking this as an example of it. Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, where the overwhelming number of the Central American immigrants are coming from. There's a few other, but primarily those three countries, the Northern Triangle of Central America. And if you take Honduras, which is just about the poorest country in the hemisphere now, it's even beat out Haiti for that dubious challenge. Right now, there are, in the past few years, approximately 300 people every day leaving Honduras, fleeing the country. About 300 every day fleeing Honduras. The population of the country is approximately 8 million, a little over 8 million, but 300 a day is sizable. If you want to do your math on that, quick thinking, it comes out to somewhere in the neighborhood close to 100,000 people a year. And that's a lot of people fleeing one country with a population of 8 million. Why is that happening? Well, most of you know why. It's a country where 70% of the population, these are official international and Honduran figures I'm pulling out here. 70% of the population is listed as living in poverty, with about 45% in what is called extreme poverty. That's an official designation. Living there, you begin to see what some of that means. It is pretty stark. And that is just part of it. One of the reasons why people flee from countries like Honduras is the poverty. You can't make a living there. The price of gasoline has gone up 11 times in the past 11 weeks. It goes up every week. That raises the price of everything else. So what happens, the squeeze in Honduras, economic squeeze, gets worse and worse. And the government, it's easy enough to say because it's been documented by everybody in the world. The government of Honduras and these other governments, especially Honduras, is thoroughly corrupt. The brother of the president is now indicted, is on trial for being the biggest drug trafficker in the country, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go on with all that, but there's a lot of that. So you have all that stuff going on, and of course there's the gangs and the narco traffickers. I'll come back to that in a minute too. So if you're a teenage male in Honduras, for example, your lifespan, if you're living in a poor area with gangs around, your lifespan is pretty short. You either join the gang and get killed, or you don't join the gang and get killed because they do that to you. The gangs also do extortion, and on top of everything else, if you're trying to run a small business, store something in Honduras, pay the taxes and do all the other stuff, and then the gang comes around and demands 20, 30, or 40% of your profits in order to let you stay in business. It's the modern kind of mafia thing, But all of that is there too, and if you don't do it, you will almost certainly be killed, or members of your family. So I won't go on to all this, but you can get the picture that this is a combination of poverty and extreme violence that people are fleeing. And they come up to the United States, go through Mexico. And what do we do here? Well, Sean is going to, our speaker is going to talk more about the border and what you've seen there. What I know about this is that what we've done at the border is try to keep migrants out. You know, immigrants, and especially asylum seekers, are dangerous people in a sense, because if you have a lot of people fleeing a country, leaving a country, people begin to say to themselves, there must be something really wrong with that country, right? So they are an embarrassment to the government of the country that they're fleeing from. They're also an embarrassment to the United States for several reasons, because for one thing, as many of you know, many of the conditions that people are fleeing from in Central America are things that our government has for years fashioned. Let me give you some examples. Corporate extractive industries that we have supported, the United States and Canada especially, are some of the biggest mining companies extracting, doing mining in a country like Honduras. We mine gold, silver, antimony, which you use for your cell phones, et cetera, et cetera. And of course the mining is done without any regulations. There are international laws about consulting communities. You know, if you're going to mine in a rural community, you go in and ask permission to, because it's a very disruptive thing. And so those things are not, they're abandoned, they're just ignored, most of these rules. Corporations go in, the government, with the government support and help, because the government wants this kind of development, they come in, and they, with the support of the government, the military, the police, they evict the entire community. If the community doesn't agree to allow them to mine the area that they're living in. And if you do agree to allow them to mine the area that they're living in, that you're living in, the chances are you're going to have to move anyway eventually, because the rivers are polluted. You know, the environmental destruction of mining is a big deal. I could give you figures on just the huge amount of water that is consumed by an average mining operation. Some of you know these. So all of that is disruptive, and that's been going on for years in Honduras. And what's happened, therefore, is that these rural communities have fled. They have to leave the land. You can no longer live as a self-supporting, self-sufficient community of farmers on the land. And now you're broken up, and you have to leave and find a job somewhere and go somewhere else. Your whole way of life has changed. Now you're a job seeker. You go to the city, you look for a job in Tegucigalpa or San Pedro or somewhere, and there are no jobs. There are very few jobs, and most of them are very poor paying. Your children grow up. This is the past 20 or 30 years this has been going on now. Children grow up in the cities in relative poverty. And what happens to kids growing up in poverty in poor cities? Gangs, narco-traffickers, etc. So all of this is the root of a lot of this is the whole model of, economic extraction that we've had in this country, in a country like Honduras for many years, going back really a long time. So all of that contributes to this. So in many ways we are, and then of course we give security aid to governments like Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. We've given security aid to the military and the police with the excuse that what we're really trying to do is train the police and the military so that they can keep law and order and reduce violence. But of course the military in a country like Honduras, and the police especially, are themselves often corrupt and in cahoots with the gangs, and the government uses the military police, that's what they call them in Honduras, to put down repression. So anytime you want to protest anything, protest the taking of your land or your human rights or anything, the government sends out the military or the police, which our government has helped to support and sponsor. They repress their people with dire results. So I call your attention to that one because there are bills in Congress, in our Congress, to stop the flow of what's called security aid to Honduras at the moment and to other countries. The Berta Cáceres bill, House of Representatives, 1945, the year the war ended, okay? 1945, is now in Congress, and we were trying to get people to support that in the Congress. So that's what's, why people leave. And we've done a lot of that, and including the gangs, even the gangs and the narco trafficking that's going on in Central America. The United States is partly to blame for that, too. I mean, we are responsible for that, in part because of the way that we have exported our gangs from this country in the past 20 years back to kids who grew up in the United States, in Los Angeles and California and San Diego, and they've gotten into the gang culture here in the States, and then they get back deported to countries they've never been in. They don't know anything about El Salvador or Honduras. They get deported back there, and the only way they can survive, apparently, is to be gangs. That's what they know. I could go on with that, but I won't. That's all part of that. So, the current system, we try to keep immigrants out, right? We militarize the borders, and you probably hear more about that. We separate families to make it, so that people won't come, don't want your kids to be separated when you get here. We make people wait a long time at the border for weeks or even months in bad conditions. You know all the stuff, you've heard it all. We keep people in Mexico, that's against the law. And then what we do is try to criminalize, and I want to make this point before I quit here and start to speak. We try to criminalize immigrants. Why do you hear all the criminalization of immigrants? Why is our president and everybody else criminalizing immigrants? Well, first of all, because they're embarrassing, but also because criminalization of immigrants is necessary. It's an essential thing to do. We are a country where to criminalize means that we call immigrants illegal aliens when we know for a fact that if you are here seeking asylum, if you come to the border, if you get to the border of the United States, cross the border, even if you don't cross in a legal crossing zone, if you cross anywhere in the border, turn yourself over to the border agency or any authority and say, we want to apply for asylum in the United States, you automatically are here legally. You have a right to be here until such time as you can have a reasonable hearing. That is the law. It's international law, it's US law, if you apply for asylum. And so, I keep reinforcing this every time I talk about it, because it's worth remembering. When they say illegal aliens, you know that 80% or 90% of the people coming from Central America are asylum seekers, or should be asylum seekers. And they are here if they declare themselves that they have a right to be here legally. They are not here illegally. So that's the point. But why do we call them, you hear it in the media, why are they illegal aliens? Well, we don't want to deal with these people. We won't want them here. They are an embarrassment to us. They are, but on the other hand, this business is also lucrative. The whole immigration system, I've been studying this one, is a cash cow for some people. Do you realize that the people, the immigrants living in the United States, just the Honduran immigrants in this country, that come here to work, they support their families back in Honduras because their families have nothing and are trying to survive on that poverty level that I told you about. So they send a little money back to if they can find work in the US, send it back to the people there. And the Hondurans, just the Hondurans in this country, the past 2 years, have returned, the remittances they send back to their families amount to approximately $4 billion a year with a B, just the Hondurans. Now that is the largest single income for the Honduran country, Honduran government, bigger than anything else, mining or anything else. So it's a lucrative business for the Honduran government. And so all this talk about immigrants, it gets a little confusing because on the one hand, we criminalize immigrants, and on the other hand, there's a lot of vested interest in keeping the system going. The coyotes, the guys, all of these people use the system, and our government benefits both economically and politically from the flow of immigrants. Politically because our president can always make this a big issue, you know. It's a political issue for him. So people are getting rich and famous and having fun off the backs of immigrants. And the misery that this causes to people in their lives is overwhelming. And I'm sure Sean has more stories about that. I'm going to have to stop here. What is needed, we need a better system at the system. One thing is, there are about 330 immigration judges, 350 maybe now in this country, and there are 750,000, the last count, 750,000 pending asylum cases in our system. How can 330 judges for the entire country, 350? You know, it takes years. So I have been involved in cases where I get a call from the lawyer and says, well, the hearing's been postponed for 2 years. Okay? So the person's in detention in one of our awful detention centers for 2 years. Or they might be allowed out, you know, if you're lucky. So we need to change that. If we really want to have a decent, you know, if we're going to have an immigration system, then let's put money into training, you know, more judges, having a system that's more adequate to the needs. We need to change the conditions of foreign aid and the way that our government, our foreign policy is toward countries in Central America, so that we don't keep producing the very things that drive people here. And, you know, a couple of other things that have to do with that too. Stop supporting our repressive governments there as well. I've been talking too long as it is, so I'm going to stop now and just want to give you a little bit of background.